Welcome back to the F word, where the F stands for fraud, not what you were thinking. Before we get into today's episode, if you're enjoying the show and want to stay ahead of how fraud is actually evolving in the real world, make sure you hit subscribe. We break down real cases, real schemes, and how they actually work.
And, more importantly, how they actually get past controls that everyone thinks is working.
Today's episode is a good one. We're talking about a case that hit the headliners recently, a 1.5 million wire fraud involving Quebec's public auto insurer.
And the key word here is not hack, but it's believable.
So let's set this up. The insurer wires 1.5 million to what they believe is an IT vendor.
Yeah, it had the correct name, correct context, and all the correct documentation.
Except it wasn't the vendor.
No, it was a bunch of fraudsters posing as the vendor. Classic spoofing, but not in the way people think.
Dave, please walk me through that quickly.
Well, people think spoofing means a fake email address, but unfortunately that's outdated in today's world. What we see now is either email accounts compromised or near perfect impersonation layered on top of real business activity. And in this case, the insurer made two payments, one smaller and one large, to a bank account they believed belonged to the vendor.
And the money just disappears.
Yeah, pretty quickly, yes, which is why one of the most important points in the article is the 48-hour recovery window.
Explain that?
Well, once money hits the fraudster's account, you've got roughly 48 hours to react before it's moved, layered, or withdrawn, if you're lucky. After that, recovery is almost impossible.
Very difficult. The article talks about a big increase in these types of frauds.
Yes, cyber claims in Canada alone jumped over 100% this year. And the reason is simple. The attacks are getting better.
How so?
Well, they moved from the obvious fraud to indistinguishable fraud. One of the lawyers quoted said it perfectly. The days of the obvious fake email are gone.
So no more terrible spelling and suspicious fonts?
Exactly. No more Comic Sans for fraud. Now
That's my favorite font, Dave. It's my favorite font.
Now it's the correct tone, the correct signature, and the correct timing. And sometimes it's sitting right inside a legitimate email thread.
Sure, that's terrible. Let's break this down properly. What are the mechanics?
Well, at a technical level, it's a 5-step process. First is access. Fraudsters get into an email environment. This could be through stolen credentials, malware, purchased access, or the help of an insider. The second is observation. They sit in the system and watch who pays invoices, how approvals may work, and when payments are made.
So they're not rushing.
No, they're patient. This is a reconnaissance mission. Third is insertion. They step into an existing conversation or create one that looks identical. Remember that in order to create an email, all I have to do is copy out a previous email and put, replying to, and have all of that detail there. I don't actually need to hit reply to. And fourth is manipulation. They request a change in banking details. And this is where my quote in the article comes in. If you get a request to change banking details, please pick up the phone and call someone you actually know works at the company. Not who signed the email with a telephone number handily put at the bottom of the email or reply to the email itself.
I mean, that sounds pretty simple. That's simple, right?
It's simple,
Easy.
but it's just not done. People are lazy. It's far easier to hit reply to the email and say, did you actually mean to change your bank account? Or it's easier to look at the phone number at the bottom of the email and phone that number and say, hey, Joe, did you change your bank account? All you're doing is talking to the fraudster.
I mean, I know I'm guilty of that. I'm not a fan of being on the phone. So, Dave, what is then the next final step?
Well, the final step is execution. So here what they do is they'll work with the company. They won't go for a large payment straight away. They'll actually go for a small payment. Hey, let's just test that the bank account that you've changed it to works. Let's just transfer $1, $100, whatever the amount is, but a small payment. And then when it works, they get back to you and say, yeah, no, bank account's changed successfully. Please go ahead with the $1.5 million, in this case, transfer, which was then done.
It's crazy. So we've talked about quite a few cases in our time, Dave, and you've seen something similar internally, not just externally.
Yes, and this is where the case gets interesting. We work on a case. We worked on a case, a mid-sized company, good controls on paper, but it was a small company, and one individual therefore had access to setting up vendor payments, uh, processing those payments, and helping out with the bank reconciliation.
So that's the full loop, pretty much.
Exactly, and if we go back to our good old fraud triangle, that's all the
You going
opportunity
there?
you require. And that's not segregation of duties, that's consolidation of opportunity.
What did they do, Dave?
They redirected payments into their own account, but recorded them in the system as a legitimate supplier payment.
So the books looked clean.
On the surface, yes, and on the surface, the bank accounts actually look clean, which is where life gets interesting. But the cover up is more of the interesting part. They printed payment confirmations. They then were clever because they blacked out the details of who was paid and then
Hmm.
used whiteout to go over the top of the blackout. Now, this has been done by somebody who's been caught before, because if you just put whiteout over the name, somebody can hold that up to the light and have a look and actually read what was there beforehand. By using blackout, you're stopping that from happening.
Wow, that's almost manual fraud.
It's very manual,
Hmm.
and that's the point. Fraud doesn't need high tech; it needs to be believable.
I mean, I'm kind of impressed, but so what's the link between that case and the SAAQ case? Is it SAAQ or SARC?
Yeah, it's SAAQ. Different
Okay.
points of entry, but the same weakness. In the first one, the external fraud pretends to be a vendor. The internal fraud, the employee becomes the vendor,
Wow, that's a pretty good line.
and both rely on the same thing: unverified trust.
Sure. Terrifying. So the article hints at internal controls. Let's just go a little bit further. How often is there an insider?
More often, unfortunately, than people would like to believe. But it's not always intentional.
Explain that.
Well, you've got two types of insider. You've got the willing insider, probably rare, but very, very dangerous. And then you've got the unwitting insiders. These are people who click on links, who don't follow protocol. And unfortunately, these are very, very common.
IT's worst nightmare. What do they do?
Well, they skip verification, they trust the email, and they process the payment. And suddenly they're part of that fraud chain.
So scary. So what should people be catching?
Well, there are always signals. Change in bank account, normally accompanied by a sense of urgency. Hi, Dave, I've changed my bank account. For the payment that you're going to be making today, would you please change it to the following email bank account number? Why so much? There's a slight shift in communication tone. Doesn't quite sound the same as the person that you've normally been dealing with. And their payment timing anomalies. In our case, we saw transactions happening late at night, early in the morning, Friday afternoons when everybody had left, and over the weekend.
Which is not when suppliers normally operate.
Occasionally they do, especially if your supplier's a nightclub.
Hmm. Well, most companies think they have controls, so they're okay, Dave, right?
All
Hmm.
companies have controls. It's just, do they have effective controls?
What's the difference?
Well, a control that relies on email confirmation, documentation, or dual approval will fail if the underlying information is compromised.
Hmm. So two people approving bad information doesn't really help.
Correct. It just makes it official.
So let's make this practical. What actually works?
Well, three things. Independent verification is always number one. Call somebody you already know. And I mean, not the number in the email, or don't reply to the email. Pick up the phone and talk to somebody you know at the company. Second, treat any bank detail changes as high-risk events. These are events that are going to lose you money. They are not routine admin. Not many companies change bank accounts during their entire lifespan. They might, but it's
Oh,
rare that they do. And third, assume that it's been compromised.
I mean, that's really wise. Why? I mean, never heard of companies just changing bank details. That sounds like a mission on their part. I mean, you also sound a little bit paranoid, Dave, to be honest.
Well, it's not paranoid, it's happening.
So what's the takeaway?
Well, fraud has shifted. It no longer is about breaking into systems, it's about operating actually inside them.
So if you take one thing from today's episode, just because the email looks real,
Doesn't mean that the person behind it is.
and if someone asks you to change banking details,
Pick up the phone.
and that's it for today's episode of The F Word. If you want more breakdowns like this, real cases, real mechanics, and how to actually protect yourself, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
Because fraudsters are getting better. You probably should be getting better too.